I literally don't know what you're saying, but as long as you do, that is all that matters.
Well, that's good. Be Your Elite. Here we go. Be Your Elite episode 4.
Yes.
Miss Danielle with us. Take 2.
Yep. This is take 2.
This is take 2. But I guess that's good. We rehearsed our little, even though as much as I like spontaneous, honest conversations, but this will still be honest. It's just the fact that it just gives us another opportunity to sort of learn from our last conversation and
True.
Maybe another day's worth. We have a maybe a little bit more in-depth perspective of it and maybe be able to articulate it a little better. Probably not.
Probably not.
So
this is my favorite topic. It's my favorite.
I know, this was so funny. We had an amazing conversation yesterday. And as I was editing it, it was, I don't know what happened. It was so...
You did not like the audio.
It was unlistenable.
For the general public, it would not have mattered, but for this guy, he couldn't put it out. So here we are. Take 2.
That's not
communication.
Exactly. Communication. That's what we were talking about. This is Danielle's 100% most favorite thing.
Yep.
On the planet. So I guess I have to repeat from yesterday because you always get all dolled up for these things and you look gorgeous, bro.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Oh, that's very sweet. I'm being serious. Jeez Louise. Sorry, everybody. It's pretty hot right now. If you don't believe me, go to our YouTube channel and watch this video. Or watch this podcast on video.
Yep.
Because they're there as well. So what's up? You going to start this thing or do I need to do that again?
No, you have to do that again. You're a good leader.
Gosh. So essentially, yesterday we talked about last week we had I almost said falling out. That's not the right word. We had a little disagreement that cost us some time, and it got me in a position, in a state of where I was really trying to figure out why I was so angry and how we lost so much time together. And really, the conversation wasn't that big of a deal, but the lesson that was associated with that conversation ended up being something really good for me because I identified a pet peeve of mine in a weird way, a sort of it allowed me actually to connect our disagreement and conversation last week to a lot of previous experiences in my life where I couldn't figure out why, or maybe I just wasn't ready to acknowledge them, or I just didn't care at the time, why I became so frustrated in certain situations and certain conversations. And you brought that out, but it cost us a couple of days.
Well, it cost you a couple of days, but it was...
I mean, bitch, you're a part of this relationship. So
it was a good lesson learned, though, because we have so many more good days than bad that we almost can maybe feel like we're kind of taking it for granted because it is so almost effortless now compared to the effort that we were putting in earlier in the year to get through the storm.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Just
in reference or in comparison,
sure,
yeah, for sure.
We just have had so little disagreements.
Not that we've really disagreed all that much in the past, but we'll talk a little bit about some of our past and how some of our previous communications that aren't how they are today possibly might have led to certain situations or certain decisions that both of us made leading into certain parts of our marriage that got us in particular situations. But we'll kind of talk about that a little bit as we get more into this conversation. But essentially what this piece that me and you have talked a lot about is getting stuck in the past and living in the future. So I try to tell people like wholeheartedly, like, man, you can't live anywhere but in the present. And people always talk about, oh, be present, create presence, and all these other kind of things. And then you start looking at all these different tools and these ideas and these thoughts of people that kind of keeps them out of those, because the future is worry
Yeah.
It's just worrying about the possibility of what can happen. You're trying to predict all these things. You're filling in holes with assumptions and so forth and so forth. But that's another topic. But for this one specifically, we're talking about getting stuck in the past and understanding the concept that presence isn't all the time. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm happy 100% of my life."
Right.
Like I've never met anybody that's like, "Yeah, never had any lows,
Right.
no trauma, no sadness. I am just the happiest person you will ever meet." Well, yeah, I think if you were to bundle up some people's lives, they can say that. Like, yeah, as a whole, with their peaks and their valleys, um, if you draw a line right through the middle of that, like, yeah, I'm generally happy for the most part.
Yeah.
And so we sort of have, and you brought up a fantastic point yesterday when we were talking about how presence is one thing. We can't be present all the time because there are moments in your life where you are going to have to go visit your past to try to figure out things either you didn't deal with or you compartmentalized or you just didn't face or you didn't acknowledge the lesson being taught, and you may have to kind of go back through and figure out some of those steps in your life to piece things together that's happening to you currently now.
Right.
That
Learn
you
the
may,
lesson.
yeah,
you may have that too.
You may have overlooked, but your point yesterday was perfect, and you brought up mindfulness.
Right.
Um,
They're kind of synonymous, but it's another word that allows more people to kind of understand that way of living where you feel like presence always is impossible. And I think it just depends on how you are interpreting the word. So using the term mindful is a better descriptor for some people to understand what our intention is behind being present.
Yeah. You're mindful of your emotions. You're mindful of your past. You're mindful of
the choices that you're making.
Yeah.
You're mindful of how you're spending your time. You're mindful of how you're spending your energy and how you're taking care of your body. And that is being present. So,
well, mindfulness is the first step. Like if you can't be mindful in everything you do,
right.
like it has to have intention. It has to be sort of in that moment of like what in that moment sometimes can be, I'm dealing with emotions that are a week old, but you're mindful of where they're at right now
right.
in your current being.
Right.
Which is different than I'm present right now and I'm just feeling what's happening now.
Right.
Right now we're in a podcast and in this moment we have good energy and things are amazing and we're having this great conversation. It's thought provoking and there's ideas. I'm not mindful of what I was feeling yesterday that could still be bothering me.
Right.
And it's not that I'm shutting it off or turning it down. It just means that I'm so present in this moment because I'm not dealing with anything in my past anymore. We don't have that communication problem right now that we had that breakdown last week. So we sort of resolved it. And I think that's sort of the point of this thing is like, for us, we're very big about not letting anything fester.
Yeah.
Because I think fester is like, it can last a couple of days. It can last a couple of weeks. And there's probably some people that are listening to this. It's like, man, we have issues that have been festering for 10 years.
Right.
And it's like, it can last a decade. I mean, we had festering issues for anywhere between 5 to 10 years probably in our marriage.
The chaos that always happens in most people's relationships is they'll have a disagreement about something current, but then it will spin out of control into whatever it is that it always goes back to. And that has been like their same argument from the word go, from very early on in their relationship.
Yeah, it's not
probably.
Actually the thing you're disagreeing
right.
with currently.
It just circles all the way back to that thing that never got resolved.
You're using that as like the justification and the reason to bring up that old thing again. Instead of just you don't need a justification to.
Well, you just need to figure out why it's still there. Like come to an agreement, acknowledge it, figure out where the miscommunication is, where the maybe it's hurt feelings, maybe it's the way you interpreted it versus the way that I interpreted it, which is usually the case for most people, not just me.
You're always wrong as shit.
Well, I'm a terrible communicator. So then you interpret it really badly because I deliver it really badly. And so it's just a big fat cluster sometimes.
Yeah.
Or was.
Was really bad, yeah.
But
last week was really bad.
Yeah,
you fucked that up so bad, it's ridiculous.
You're so dumb.
What? True or false?
True. The way
Just
that you
kidding.
interpreted
Dude,
it, true.
don't admit true. Be like, no, we were both fucked up in that situation. Because that's the truth.
Yes.
We both had,
But lesson learned, and we've learned also that there's no time expectation to get through things. And
mhm.
so you have to be really open and honest in your own relationship and understand that, yes, it took us 2 days to get through that, but it may take you a week. It may take you a minute, but no
Well,
expectations.
yeah, but what's hard about that is like some people don't want to go, holy shit, that could take 10 years. It's like, yeah, we had unspoken, unresolved resentment building
I think anybody,
animosity
sure, but
for,
anybody that's been in a relationship for as many years as we have, so 18 now,
mhm.
there's going to be something that never got fully resolved somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere for sure. But I'm talking about big ones where you're like,
Right.
there's an elephant in the room, but
Yeah.
nobody's acknowledging it, but it doesn't really exist and everything's kind of good. Well, we're just going to let that thing go. And all of us are
Just to keep the peace.
yeah, just to keep the peace. And that's where we talked a lot about in our first conversation. This thing is your inability to want to deal with contention.
Right.
And I'll talk about that here in just a second. But I think one of the things that people are hearing 10 years right now, like, holy shit, like, I think I'm 3 years into this or 4 years into this, and I don't know how to approach my partner with this. And it's like, look, we talked about not having expectations on time. And if it is, maybe it's 5 years, maybe you have 3 infants running around your house right now, and
Right.
now isn't the time to deal with it.
Right.
But the reality of it is that when you do create that honesty and you do allow that thing to unfold in its natural timeline, which there isn't one, it's going to be dictated by the two people that are in the relationship. You may go to have that conversation because you're ready and you're creating honesty and you're ready to go, and your partner's going to be like, no, man, it's going to be another year before I'm even in that place because I'm still exploring myself
Right.
in this relationship and what this is. But at the end of the day, if you guys are willing to fight together and have that commitment and honor those commitments, and then realize that at the end of that you guys are willing to acknowledge that, yeah, we will have to have this conversation one day with no expectation on timeline, it's worth it. It's more
Yeah,
than worth it,
for
because
sure.
what's gained and what wisdom and knowledge that you guys create as a couple together, if you guys stay parallel with your guys' journey in life, when your guys' roads come back together and meet, it's unbelievable. Like, I don't think without everything that didn't happen to us this year, we wouldn't be as solid as we are now. There's
No.
no way.
No, there had to be a catapult, and of course it's usually trauma, sadly, but um we're so grateful for that
Yeah.
huge push in
I mean, you're grateful for it.
for sure.
I don't
I'm
think
just grateful.
I'm not grateful for it. That shit
No.
was horrible.
We learned a
I'm just
lot.
kidding.
We really, really learned a lot. And
Yeah, a crazy amount. Yeah. But that's the
you kind of touched on it though, and it's important that we really kind of hit home with the fact of the different seasons, and
yeah.
everything happens. Well, I won't say that. There are seasons where, especially like for me when I was raising young children, that was all the bandwidth that I had to get through my day. Was my energy was just to survive that toddler, and
Yeah,
I
and
didn't have anything left to have any kind of thought-provoking, challenging conversations
yeah, and then our parallel for that though was I was using my entire bandwidth to survive the beginning
of your crazy
of
career.
my career in the special forces. It's
Right.
like that thing it's so fast and it's so unknown, and you have I'm not trying to equate it to, it's so people that kind of know our story. Danielle essentially raised our kids alone while building her own career as a dental hygienist, but because I was just deployed and gone all the time and in
Right.
schools and traveling, and I lived in Texas while you lived in North Carolina for almost 3 years. So we sort of had this, like, man, I was dumping everything I had into this high risk, high demanding, high time load
Yeah.
of a job. And so we both were kind of in that same world on our own, where we were just giving to something else and just ignoring our own self-interest and our own needs.
And not even intentionally. And I'm
No,
sure it happens to so many people, as they're just, again, just trying to follow the quote unquote, you know, norm.
yeah, yeah. You come home every day, you cook dinner, you both
Yeah.
raise kids equally.
Doing
It's
my job. Right.
your
These are
turn to
my
change the
chores.
diapers.
These are your chores, like so silly. But getting through that, that was how we got through it. So everyone has to figure out their own
Yeah,
journey and their own survival through the hard years. But it's really, really important though that you don't forget your relationship. And I think we failed there a little bit as far as not
yeah, but
focusing.
I think there's this weird piece of like a foundation of you're you're committed to the relationship regardless of how long it's on hold.
Yeah, for sure.
So as long as that exists, it's like, look, we got to raise these kids, and he's got this career. Maybe this is I think in our heads we were probably like, oh, this is just going to be 2 or 3 years. Kids will be in daycare, and they're going to start kindergarten, and then we're back to us.
Right.
Maybe that was like some kind of unspoken subconscious thing in our own heads, but I think at the end of the day, there was always that like base level of like them committed to this relationship. We might just be on hold right now for a little bit because there's a lot of shit going on.
Right.
Um,
It's called
and
life.
that, yeah, and I think that came to an end for you eventually, where you were just like,
There has
no,
to be more. Like there's
yeah, there's got to be
definitely
more
something.
than what we built.
Mhm.
We're missing something, and
Yeah.
I don't want a part of this anymore. I'm ending, and I think we both. Trinity in there playing with the dog. So yeah, that's an important piece that like you will start to question your own shit. You're going to start questioning the relationships that you're in. And I think that's where we had a really big conversation that now we think the most important aspect, because we didn't really circle back to each other until we more or less just cut each other off, and we're like, look, dude, I'm not concerned about you right now because I'm trying to figure out me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out the relationship with myself.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it is. I don't know what this mother of two, wife of an SF guy, dental hygienist even means. And then the same on my end. I don't know what, husband, special forces guy, business owner even means anymore. And we were so disconnected from each other because we didn't have a relationship with ourselves.
Right.
Because we were just giving so much to everybody around us that we didn't have
Right.
anything left for a healthy relationship, let alone ourselves.
Right.
And when you don't know yourself and you're trying to give, you know, energy or emotions or whatever, it's like they're unknown. They're unknown emotions because you're like, what kind of love is this? Is it genuine? Is it authentic? Is it, is this happiness and joy we're feeling right now? Because you're not quite sure if that's what you're feeling because you're semi numb,
Right.
because of all the stuff that's going on. So I think we talked about this a little bit because people will talk about communication being the most important thing in relationships. And we don't think that that's the most important thing in relationships. We think the relationship with yourself is the most important thing for relationships. And then once you figure that out, then communication almost just takes care of itself because you're talking so authentic and so genuine and so honestly with the person that you're involved with that there is no unknowns between you guys now. And the moment you start having unknowns, that's where resentment and animosity comes in because you're trying to fill holes with a bunch of
Right.
assumptions.
Yes.
And by nature, we fill those holes with majority of the time something negative.
Right.
We're thinking the worst is going to happen, and that starts to be like, oh man, he's off doing this and he's having fun and and I'm here with the kids now. And it's like, well, that's not the reality. I was, sleeping in the woods somewhere trying to survive and I'm not out there by all means having the best time of my life all the time, or whatever the case may be. And I think we all get in those situations. So I think that's where, a lot of people always ask us, like, where do you start? And when we're having this conversation, the first thing too, I want to kind of clear up is like, this isn't relationships for like a husband and a wife and a partner and a partner. This could be a best friend and a best friend.
Yeah.
It could be you and your boss. It could be you and your colleagues. It doesn't really matter. But these concepts and these ideas that, like, if you don't have a relationship with yourself, you're going to go to work and just bullshit your way through work. And how long is that actually going to last? I mean, there's a lot of people that have created short-term, careers and relationships because they were just trying to bullshit their way through everything with themselves, with their jobs, with everything. So don't think that this is only a conversation for a husband and a wife, because that's just not the truth either. You've got to have a relationship with yourself, and the catch for that is it's not a short path.
No, it's not. And again, it's going to be different for everybody. And a lot of it just depends on the trajectory of your own life. And sometimes it's really hard things that happen to you that make you really start your own journey to finding out who you are and what you really want, and maybe what you're missing as a human being, and change it. If you don't
Yeah, and that's
like your surroundings, if you don't like the energy you're putting out, if you don't like what you're getting in, then look inward first. And
and
then
we
it's amazing what comes back.
yeah, and that's what we talk about that all the time is actioning.
Yeah.
Like we've been surrounded by we've been in the fitness industry for a very long time, and even in the world I'm at, how many guys have come up to me and been like, "Oh, I'm going special forces this year," and I run into them 10 years later, and they're still in the same unit in the same rank, and they haven't advanced in their career anywhere, and it's like a lot of people use words and talk and all these other kind of things as like this motivation and this thing that's supposed to inspire you, and it's like you're never gonna be fully inspired until you action on something, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
reciprocating that inspiration from your own being. Like
Yeah.
you're creating that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people miss that. They're just waiting for something to inspire them
Right.
or to get them moving, or for someone to like hold their hand and take them somewhere. It's like, no, you have to action on that thing. And so part of that conversation, to circle back to communication on that like actioning thing, it's like, when do you start actioning on all of these conversations that you say you're going to have? Like once you've sat down and solidified that relationship with yourself, like, no, this is actually who I am and what I stand for, and the things that make me feel good, and the things that make me tick, and the energy that I want to put out and I want to receive back. you know when do you start actioning on that stuff to give it out into the world? When do you sit down with your partner and you're like, hey, this is me? Because we talked about this the other day. It's like, yeah, don't figure out who you are and then not tell nobody.
Right.
Don't just keep that shit to yourself and be like,
Right.
oh yeah, well, I know who I am. But
Right.
then you get around your husband and you're still being that wife that you think he wants you to be,
Right.
and then you're going to work and you're being that employee that you think your boss wants you to be, and so forth and so forth. Because that's where it eventually you wake up 30, 40, 50 years and you're like, oh, holy shit, I just lost an entire lifetime because I
Mm-hmm.
was pretending and I was living in some other fantasy world, whether it be something that I thought I was in my own head that isn't presence, or I was living in the past over something that I was hung up on that
Right.
doesn't prevent me to move forward. Or I was just worrying about what was going to happen tomorrow and next Friday in 2020, you know, and you start spending your currency of time and your moments somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like the moment you get paid in time, in currency, which is finite for an individual, it's spent immediately. You get moments and they get spent immediately. So whether or not you want to be consciously there
Right.
as you're receiving the moments,
Yep.
or you want to live somewhere else, it's like, where do you want to spend that currency? Do you want your kids to be running out around the house with the biggest smiles on their faces, imagining some bullshit, and you could have sat down and been a part of that and created a connection with your kids, but instead you're dwelling on a conversation, an argument you had with your wife 5 days ago, and then you wake up and kind of zone out and realize that you just spent an hour contemplating the shit that just happened five
Right.
days ago. So it's like you can there's a lot of beauty that passes you by in this life because you choose to live in the past or the future. And that's circling back to our shit that happened last week. We started getting into this conversation about um some dental shit, and Danielle was talking about how they were trying to be integrative and some other stuff, and it started turning into this weird, I don't know, like contention, but it got past a certain level of contention, and we'll touch on that in a second. But it got past a certain point where I started to get defensive, and then
Right.
you started to get defensive, and then right there, both of us emotionally were like, "I'm not fucking
Checked
having,
out.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not having this conversation anymore." And that one bothered me so bad that I didn't talk to you for 2 days. I essentially lost 2 days, and this is what I was talking about, where you've got to identify in yourself, what am I trying to learn from this experience, and how much time am I willing to give up? How many moments am I willing to let pass by me for me to live in the past in order to learn a lesson? And so the thing was, is I sat down and was like, why did that thing bother me so bad? And I came to the conclusion that, I like everybody in a conversation to be equally engaged and equally treated, and never anybody to feel demeaned in a conversation. And that's how I started to feel in that, is that you had an expertise in the dental field, and you started kind of talking down to me and defending your thing and some other stuff. And I was like, look, if you're going to treat me like an unequal in this conversation, I'm out of this thing. And then it started allowing me to explore other experiences in my life where I had done that, where I had exploded on people, or I defended somebody else because I felt like they were being attacked in a conversation. And I realized that that's a personality trait for me that's kind of a pet peeve, that does get me in bad situations. And so it took me 10 years of being like that to finally realize in a such a trivial conversation between me and you, to actually sit down and spend 2 days and explore why that part of my characteristic actually bothers me. And what that did was it created a tool for me now to never let that happen in the future. So yeah, it may have cost me 2 days now, but had I acknowledged that, the last argument that I'd gotten that cost me 4 days, and the previous argument before that cost me a day, and all these other kind of things, if I could have recognized those, I could have saved myself weeks, lost years. So to be able to sit back and lose 2 days in moments because I was trying to figure out my own shit on why that bothered me so bad, and I was visiting my own past to try to figure out where those things were, I created a tool to now allow myself to recognize triggers moving forward, so I don't get caught in the situations where if we have conversations like that again, I'm not going to lose 2 days over it. I may lose 2 minutes or 2 hours, so I start shrinking my time because I'm building tools, because I lived in that moment. And then as the moment passed, I continued to stay there and live there and explore what that lesson was. And sometimes you may end up losing a day or 2 days or a week, but it's going to gain you in the future.
Right.
So you're setting yourself up for success for future communications, that you're never going to lose that time again.
And then the important piece to follow that is you figured that out, and then via text, because that's usually how we have to start communicating again, just so that there's no external body language or tones that...
Well, people may think that's weird, but
it's very important for us, though, because
text is our shit.
Yeah. And you'll figure it out on your own too, what works for you and what doesn't. But this is how we always come back together after we have a disagreement is, okay, I know we have a safe space to communicate. He texted me exactly what he was feeling and why he was so upset. It made perfect sense. I didn't obviously intend to speak down to you, but that's how you took it.
You didn't intend to be a bitch to me.
No, I did not intend that. But to be fair, the other lesson learned is you get very antagonistic, and I hate that. Mm-hmm. I hate to be challenged. I just feel like I just do not like to be on the receiving end of that personality trait.
Well, let's talk about that, because we were going to circle back to that, to where I think, this is my perspective and my belief, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I think a certain amount of contention in relationships around certain conversations and around certain ideas or beliefs or what people think are their truths, because there's a lot of truths in the world that aren't like scientific truth.
Sure.
Or like proof truth.
No.
But they're truth to the individual.
Absolutely.
At the time. Where you have those truths. And for me, I don't ever want to be in a relationship or in a conversation where you're not even open to the possibility of hearing the perspective and the challenging of another individual, even though it may go against your beliefs. Like, the conversation has to be open.
Yes.
And what ends up happening is you don't like contention so much, you're not even open for the conversation a lot of the times.
Sometimes.
In certain things.
That's a fair statement. But on the same topic, I just like there to always feel
like peaceful harmony.
Yes.
Almost. Yeah.
I think you can challenge somebody without antagonizing.
Mm-hmm.
And once I feel like it's tipped, then I just shut down, and then I can't even like put two words together.
Yeah.
So that's my own shit.
No, but part of that is something that I'm recognizing, is that I can come off to where my intention is to challenge somebody
Absolutely.
through a little bit of contention
Think
and
outside the
being
box.
antagonizing and like, hey man, no, like don't just, that's not 100% of truth. That's a belief. Have you ever considered this? And when they're like, I don't want to, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And I'm like, no, 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 no. And then I'll start getting super antagonistic about it, just to get people back engaged. But what I realize is that that technique is good for some people and it's bad for other people. It's
Right.
bad for you,
Well, yeah,
obviously.
it's just knowing your audience
But people have the tendency to get the vibe off me that I'm trying to convince them that I'm right.
right.
And I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right. I'm trying to convince you to stay engaged in the conversation.
Right. Well, it's just like you said, though. That works for some and it doesn't work for others.
Until what it comes down to is I just want to have a thought-provoking idea or conversation around something and then have a respectable understanding at the end of it.
Well, there's room for growth on both parties when that conversation can be had.
Yeah.
And so that's what we have to continue working on is when we know we're tiptoeing into potentially differing viewpoints, that's okay. We have different viewpoints on a lot of things.
Yeah. And I'm ready to go there like at a whim.
Right.
It doesn't matter where I'm at. And you kind of have to be prepared for it. You have to be in the right energy. You have to be in the right place.
Right. Well, I talk all day. And so sometimes I don't want to just talk.
Well, and contention for you is something that brings back old memories of like, no.
Right.
And we identified that. It was like one of those things where we had a really extensive, long conversation of like how you got to a point of just being agreeable to everything.
Right.
And then how much resentment that brought up because you just didn't want to deal with the contention.
Right.
So this is where I challenge people to at least start recognizing what's inside themselves of like, oh, am I just becoming so codependent on an individual that I'm just not willing to deal with any kind of contention and I'm just sitting back, and then how much resentment that's building up inside of you.
Absolutely.
And then how much miscommunications, opportunities, or tools it is you in a relationship you guys are missing out on because that ultimately led to you feeling trapped. And then your only communication that you can think of was to just leave.
Yeah. Right. Which is crazy, but that's absolutely right.
Like you just wanted a divorce because we had gotten to a point, and this is an interesting story because it had gotten to a point where like we would start to go down a conversation. And I'm an aggressive guy. I probably am less aggressive than I used to be, but I'd imagine myself in my youth and our early marriage where it's like we would start to have a conversation with something and I would probably respond back and was like, that's fucking stupid. I can't believe you actually think like that. Instead of, that's an interesting perspective. I actually was thinking of it like this, and then opening up a safe space for a conversation. My verbal communication and skills around the knowledge of that just wasn't what it is now, obviously. But that just got you to a point where you instantly shut down and were like, oh yeah, you're right. And then so for me, I'd be like, oh, okay.
Cool. This is
marriage is easy. And
great.
We coasted for 10 years like that. Yeah. We literally coasted for 10 years like that, where any kind of like major decision making or any kind of thing, we would like start a conversation and I'd be like, whoa, that's bullshit. What about this? And then she'd be like, okay, yeah, you're right. And then it would just be over. So when you asked for a divorce in 2011, I was fucking clueless.
Right.
I was thinking, man, this marriage shit everybody talks about is super easy and we don't fight and we don't disagree and we have 2 great kids and
right. So yeah, that's super unhealthy. You have to disagree. If I mean there has to come a point in time where you were raised this certain way, I was raised this certain way. So some things that we believe to be truths just purely based off of what our experiences are going to be different.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's supposed to be.
Who would have thought? So that's to my point where this contention thing is like, don't hide from it with your partner. Like,
right.
But the other thing too is I like to think of contention as a gauge. It's like, at what point is contention healthy and it's challenging and it invokes thought into people and like gets them to want to explore another idea? And when does contention turn into aggression? Where it's like, okay, I did this too much. I'm just out of this whole thing. And I think that's going to be dependent on the individuals in the conversation.
Well, it's just like anything. Learning how to communicate is also learning how to disagree peacefully.
Yeah.
And be okay with it.
Disagree peacefully.
Yeah.
That's the smartest thing you've ever said.
Even with this vertigo brain? Amazing.
That is literally amazing. Disagree peacefully.
Yes.
I like that. I'm gonna have to take that. Man, there's two good things you just taught me during this 45 minutes we spent together.
So funny.
Why is that so funny? No, so
Live and learn.
this
Your
is
favorite. Here we go. All these cool little.
Please stop. Please stop with the cliches. With the truth.
It's
with the true
important.
cliches. Just stop with them. No, but the thing is like, so this is another funny thing. Yesterday, I'm texting Danielle. I'm like, hey, hurry up and get home. We got a podcast to do. And she's like, what? So she thought when I asked her to do this podcast with me that we would be another communication thing. This thing's important to me and I enjoy it. And this is a lot of growth for me because there are a lot of thought-provoking conversations. It allows me to explore the way I think in my own head. Like I just have things where I just shit out my decision. And I'm like, I don't even sometimes realize how I even came to that decision based on my own experiences. But so these conversations allow me to sort of dive into my own process of the way I think about certain things. And this conversation, I was like, hey, we'll hop on a podcast every couple of weeks. We'll do like a,
I missed that.
Dave and Dan.
Totally missed all that.
Yeah. And it was like,
I thought it was a one and done, guys. I thought it was episode 1, 2. I guess it was 2.
Episode 2, our story.
Yeah.
And you thought you were just
I thought that was it.
I did my wifely duty. Yeah, but then the thing is like I don't think you realize how powerful your experiences are and how important it is to document those little things right there.
True. That's
At least for me personally.
Right.
I don't think that unless we actually sat down, put these headphones on and trapped into our own world of this electronic conversation, because this is like super intimate when you get on these things, that we may have at least got a snapshot into some of those thoughts of your brain. Because you would rather just stare at birds and trees and let the sun hit your face and smile and make out.
I'm pretty easy to please. It's true.
Yeah,
life is good.
Pretty simple. Like super hot.
You're very sweet.
Super hot. Great personality. Laughs at all the dumb shit I do. Lets me do whatever I want. And you don't require any maintenance. It's like what the hell? And then you got me over here. I'm like the most high maintenance dude on the planet.
That's true.
What? I can't believe you just agreed to that statement.
You gotta have the yin and the yang. That's how life works. That's how partnerships work.
You really think I'm high maintenance? I'm emotionally high maintenance.
Yes, you are.
If we're talking about partners, because I do have, and these are other things that, if you have expectations about a relationship, you might want to fucking verbalize that shit.
Well, yes, and yeah, when we were talking earlier about our early relationship, it kind of reminded me that, you kind of set your own tone. So if when you're dating, you act a certain way, and then when you're married, you act a certain way, and then your husband perceives you to be this certain way, and he's always bragging about how wonderful you are and how perfect you are and how everything's always taken care of. And so then you feel like you have to live up to these expectations because that's the groundwork that you've laid. So it's my fault for allowing that to become who I was when maybe I didn't feel like it's not really who I want to be, but this is who I've been. So this is what I'm going to be. Right. So it's important that you're happy with yourself and you're being authentic and you're being true to yourself.
Right back to that relationship with yourself.
Yes. First and foremost.
Yeah. Cause we ditched that for 17 years, probably 16 years.
Well, and then just trusting that your partner is going to really respect that and want to see this growth in their partner.
Yeah. Yeah. So
back to the fear thing. I was so afraid. Of disappointing you that I was just like, can't do it. I'm just going to divorce you instead. So stupid.
Yeah. Which I had no idea. I didn't know you were scared of our marriage or our relationship, not from like
I didn't want to disappoint you.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. You're living in this fear in your own head that you created about an expectation. But what I mean by set expectations, because these are things that like I already talked about the story where she's like, I've been drinking coffee for 11 years, and I'm like, I fucking care if you're drinking coffee, like but those things where she had these expectations of what she thought I wanted her to be, which
Mm-hmm.
were, keep the house clean, do raise the kids, go to church, do, you know, don't drink coffee, don't do alcohol, don't, all these like expectations of these tangible things that I can look at and go, yep, she got her hair's the right way, she's dressing the right way, my kids they were off to school on time today. It's like that was my checklist, and in my what I really what I
Right.
really needed was like
None of that.
someone to like sit on the couch with me and like cuddle and
Right.
kiss my neck and hold my hand as we were walking through
Right.
on a hiking trail on Sundays. Like those were my highest values, not a clean house or a
Right.
cooked dinner or whatever the case may be. But I never expressed any of that. I just expected that the person that I'm getting into a lifelong committed relationship would understand that, like, no, this is what intimacy and marriage and relationships is about.
Right.
We have a lot of sex, we cuddle a lot, we kiss a lot, we make out, we grope each other, we take care of each other, we keep the house clean together, we keep like all these expectations of what I think an intimate, committed relationship should look like.
Right. And that circles us back to the knowing your partner's love language,
Yeah.
on all the different.
Well, even outside of the love language, but not putting
My priorities, I was actioning on.
Mhm.
Those were not your priorities. So I was speaking my love language clear as day, but it was not being received.
Yeah, and I was like,
And
this is the dumbest
same
shit I've
thing
ever
for
done.
right, and the same thing for you. You were very clear with your love language, but you were not speaking to me because you did not put your laundry away.
Yeah.
And
now I make the bed every morning, and she's like the happiest woman on the
It's
planet.
amazing. I mean it, guys.
Except for today, sorry.
I did notice it didn't get made.
I know. I didn't want you to. I could feel the energy from you about how the bed didn't get made. Jeez Louise. You see what I've been living with for 18
again,
years?
though,
That's a
this
lot.
is back to the importance of living and learning and understanding
sure.
that you're not always
So we should be doing what?
making beds. Duh.
Live and learn. You're throwing out these black ass cliches, bro.
No, it's important. It is important. There's a lesson to be learned in all things, and you're a fool if you don't learn that lesson. Period.
Yeah, I think that
it's going to be a sad life.
So funny. I was watching Lewis Holmes today. About how you're a fool every day. And then you think that like I learned my lesson, I won't be a fool tomorrow. And then you wake up the third day and realize you were a fool the day before. So when you said that, it made me realize that kind of quote was like, well, if you're not living and learning, you are a fool. But yeah, that's true. I wouldn't say you're a fool. I would say you're ignorant as all hell, because you sort of ignorant isn't even the right word. It's like, it's insanity. You know the lesson.
Yeah.
You have it in front of you. You've experienced it, and you're still ignoring it and
doing the same thing,
and then being like, I don't understand what's wrong.
Right.
And it's like, man, back to those, like, trying to create a little bit of brutal honesty with yourself on like who you are and what you stand for and what you want to do and where you're trying to go and where you think growth is important, and being honest about some of those things, and then being honest about the relationships that you're committed to in your life. And then understanding the different types of relationships and how your communication between some of those different relationships are going to be a little bit different. Like, my communication is completely different between mine and yours as it is to, like mine and Andy's.
Right.
Like it's a.
You respect each other, but of course there's a level of love that you and I share when we communicate that obviously doesn't get sent Andy's way.
But at the same time, like
but it's important that you still respect any relationship.
Yeah, I just think the depth of the relationship isn't obviously as deep as ours, but I think the communication is the same. Like, there's still the same level of honesty. There's still the same.
For sure.
Like, I'm not repeating some of the same mistakes that me and you make together. Obviously, we don't have to be so intimate with understanding each other's characteristics, because we don't have all of the complexities of a committed relationship together, like bills and homes and cars and kids.
But you're also wise enough to know your audience and be as respectful as possible.
Well, and the fundamentals don't change. It's like you still have to have a great relationship with yourself.
Exactly.
You still have to be honest with the person you're trying to communicate with.
Well, you have to put out the energy that you want to
Yeah,
receive.
you have to put out that good energy, and you've got to be very clear and have a certain level of integrity with the
Yes.
people that you're deciding to have relationships with.
Right.
Um, so some of those foundations just they don't change because I'm with my wife or I'm with Andy or if I'm with Bethany or whoever, clients that I've coached or whatever. Like there still has to be those base level of things within. Don't you can't be saying one thing and then your actions are something totally different.
Right.
We use coaching as an example. It's like we're telling our clients to sleep 8 hours a night, but we sleep 3.
Right.
Like that's a breakdown of communication from the base foundation of what we were just talking about, man.
Yeah.
Have some integrity in what you do. Have some honesty with yourself. Don't be expecting one thing out of your partner that you're not willing to do yourself.
Right.
And then chastise them and hold them to a certain standard that isn't even the same standard in your own world. But then the flip side about that is like you can't have a set standard of what you think communication should be revolved around and what you think should be a level of honesty that you hold yourself accountable for and then think that that is exactly what everybody else should be doing.
Right.
Because
It's
that's another
just
thing that's got me in a whole bunch of trouble. It's like
right.
I think people should have the level of honesty that I do, which I slowly kind of a little bit starting to come to terms with. Like I'm almost too honest to an extent. Like I don't give a shit, and I'm super vulnerable, which makes some people uncomfortable. But I'm
Right.
like, well, fuck, if it makes you uncomfortable, you can fucking leave the conversation. I don't.
Well, there is a level of respect though that you need to have where people are in their own journey, and
Mm-hmm.
people that haven't had any reason to really challenge themselves or look inward or just want to be present and just be and be mindful. All of these things, you can't fault them for not knowing that they're just kind of existing at a
Mm-hmm.
very minimal, mediocre level.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, we were there, and
Yeah.
without really having some reason to be like, wait a minute, what exactly are we doing? And then
Yeah.
making changes. That's the most important piece of this, is creating space so that you can action on the things that you know you want to change. If you continue living that same crazy life where there's no time in the day to do anything better or productive or fulfilling,
Yeah.
then again, back to the insanity piece. So you have to be willing to start your own journey, for one. And so you just, we also, being on journey, I'll call it,
Mm-hmm. You're
have to
always on
respect,
journey.
well, for
That's the
sure.
flip side that some
But
people
we just have to respect, though, that there are people that do not relate.
Yeah.
They cannot hear what we're trying to say, and that's okay.
Yeah.
There may be a time that they do, and
Yeah, it comes back. There's like an awakening for the
yes,
people that want to wake up will have that awakening around.
yeah,
And I think that's an important piece to, you know, it's kind of off topic, but when when you're awake and you're around people that aren't,
it's tough, and
it's
that's why we
super
choose
tough.
our circles so
Super tough, man.
so
It's really
tight.
hard. Because you want them, you see them kind of like trudging through the mud of life,
Yes,
and you're like, dude, there's a hard paved road right here.
yeah,
Just wake up and come here with
yeah.
me, and let's
But you
let's
can't make
let
somebody do
yeah.
that.
It's like they're like no.
Yeah,
It's
I'm just gonna be over here
right
dying.
here.
Yeah.
So what do you think are the most important attributes of like communication? If we were to just like kind of put an idea on that in your own thoughts, just out of curiosity.
Um.
I mean, I think number one, first and foremost, is honesty.
Yes.
Like it with yourself first,
Yeah.
and then with like if you're not,
Yes.
it's easy to look at somebody and be like, oh, you did this and you did that, and you said you were going to do this and you didn't do that, and it's like, yeah, you're creating a ton of honesty towards them, but you weren't willing to look at yourself and be like, damn, I do this and I do that, and I say I
Right.
was going to do this, but I never did that, and I was life coaching somebody the other day, and not life coaching, but having a conversation about life, and she kind of reached out to me, a family member of mine that I love to death more than anything. And she was like, man, I was sitting there the other day and I was asking, I sort of came to this conclusion that I wouldn't want to hang out with me.
Hmm.
And I was like, huh? And I was like, and that's an interesting way to look at it. Like, would you would you be best friends with yourself? And most people would probably be like, no, man, I never show up on time. I commit to things and then I don't go and I don't, there's like all these things where you're like, why wouldn't you hang out with yourself? And
Yeah,
you start coming up with this laundry list. And it was an interesting kind of technique that was kind of her awakening. She was like,
for sure.
I don't think I would hang out with myself. And so I started like, yeah, would I drink bourbon with myself? Yeah, I would sit in a chair across from myself and drink a lot of bourbon and have a great time. So how do we get people there? It's honesty is the first
Right.
thing. Like that's the first step. So what else do you think is like?
Um, grace.
Yeah, so I think grace goes along with judgment.
Yeah.
So like you want to like it needs to be non-judgmental. It needs to be a space that's
Right. It has to feel safe.
it
Like
has to feel safe. It's got to be
no
non-judgmental, and there's
judgment.
got to be a
Right.
ton of grace.
Right.
You know, honesty.
And effort. I mean, there has to be effort and then there has to be
I think it needs to
acknowledgement.
be intentional.
Yeah.
Like don't just like communicate for the sake of communicating. Like we talked about that the other day where like we don't mean verbal communication. Like I'm communicating on your level when um the house is fairly put I work
Right.
from home. The house is fairly put together, the bed's made. There's like those things that I've committed to as your language that that like if you start to see that like the kitchen's just a little bit more dirty and like the bed hasn't been made in 3 or 4 days, something's bothering me.
Right.
And so there's like this sort of unspoken communication that's happening.
Maybe
Is like
cues is a good
yeah,
word.
cues, but just understanding that communication isn't just
Speaking, right.
verbally sitting down and having a conversation.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of communication in there. So understanding that your intention around all your actions is a form of communication.
Yep.
To your partner. So I think that's an important aspect that I try to sort of sit back and kind of think like, what am I missing in my actions daily that may be sending off the wrong signals in the
Right.
form of communication?
And then, like you said, just their action. That's the biggest. I mean, that's such a huge factor in all relationships is the action, not just the words.
Yeah.
Everybody can talk, but maybe not clearly.
Well, and
But
so I think that's
action is something, especially a habit. Like
action is obviously it's got to be one of the most important things. Like without tangible seeing
right.
action happening, you're like, But what I mean by everyone can talk is like, yeah, but how often has words been more detrimental because they're miscommunicated or they're misunderstood or they're, it's as simple as like,
okay, so maybe actioning on what you've discussed is what I mean.
Yeah,
like, let's say you've come to an agreement and this is what I need from you. This is what you need from me. You understand that we've committed to it, but then there's action for a day, maybe 2, and then it's gone again.
Yeah, but then there's that piece of like
so consistency.
Well, and
rhythm.
Having that space that you guys have created and generated that is an area where like if I did come to an agreement of like I'm going to make the bed every day and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, to come to you and be like that was just too much for me initially.
Right.
I need to maybe put the sheets on and then and make sure everything's off the counter first. Let me start there,
right.
But being able to come to you and
right.
actually go, hey man, the fucking bed ain't gonna happen,
right,
bro. Sorry, but I think I can work on the kitchen.
Yeah,
and I want you to see that I'm actually trying, because the moment you take on too much and fail in your own head, you're going back into that repeating cycle of just bad communication, in the sense that like you're not upholding your end of the bargain. So I think understanding that, like, dude, as things change and your emotions change and your thoughts change and your perspectives and your ideas change, that you got to sit down and you got to talk about, you got to say, hey man, I thought this was a week ago. And it doesn't matter if your shit changed over listening to a podcast. Like, you listen to this podcast, you're like, holy shit. Me and my wife just talked about some stuff on Thursday, and then I listened to your podcast and we were all fucked up. Don't do that. Because this is another thing we were kind of talking about, that like using people as examples. It's like, it's really hard for us to say, this is what's going to work. This is what's going to fix your shit. This is what's going to allow you guys to have the deepest connection on the planet, because it's what worked for us. it's really hard for us to kind of grasp on that idea. That's why we give thought-provoking ideas and
Yeah.
perspectives and some foundations, but not necessarily advice, because Danielle's journey and what she did that got her here today, and then my journey and what I did that got me here today, and then us coming together, and then all those factors that are in between our connection is never going to be the same as the history of any other two human
No.
beings on this entire planet. So you have to keep that in mind, in the sense that there is a lot of factors in relationships to consider, and that's why there's certain aspects of our lives that like are non-negotiable for us. Like we understand that like our purpose is relationships driven. We're forever students and we honor our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we know, if we normally keep those things, that allows us to further grow on all the tools to have good communication and have good emotional intelligence, and um, all these other different aspects of your life that actually deepen your relationships together, because we think everything is kind of um, self relationships driven. The better
Yeah.
you are with yourself and the more honesty you have with yourself, the better you can work on those three things above, and the more fulfilled and the more peace and the more presence you're going to have in the majority of the moments in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows you to see all the beauty that's coming um, in every moment, whether that just be, you know, you passing a smile to your neighbor as you were passing each other walking on the sidewalk, and realizing that that energy that you just dumped to them could have changed their day. Like that sounds so minuscule and so idealistic, but it's the fucking truth, man.
It is.
How many times you've been sitting in, uh, you know,
Well, energy is infectious and it's
yeah,
contagious.
well,
And
sitting at the grocery and someone smiling at you and
mm-hmm.
having some random conversation, and you're like, that's a really nice lady.
Yeah.
And it totally changed your day, like just like
Yep.
that. And you're like, oh man, that lady had a oh man, I should be starting my day off like that every
Yeah.
day. You know, like it's really a super powerful thing. But the moment you're standing in that grocery line and you've got that look at your face where you're lost in the past or you're worrying about what's coming tomorrow, you miss all those opportunities.
Yeah.
So how do you mitigate that? And that's sort of where we're talking about with some of this communication piece, where, you know, allowing yourself to visit those areas to find the lessons in the past. And we're visiting there, we're not living there.
Right.
Maybe you need to rent some space for a while. Maybe it's a 3-month lease, who knows? But don't ever set up a home in that space, because it's going to cost you a lot of current moments, and
Yeah.
and your time you're spending, your currency right now that you're getting, you're spending it in an area that is compiling.
Right.
Because the moment you know, on Monday, you were thinking of the Saturday that had just passed all day Monday. Now on Tuesday, you may still be stewing on Saturday, and then realizing that you lost Sunday. And then on Wednesday, you're like, gosh damn it, man, the freaking Saturday's still bugging me. And now I lost Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And it's like, that's the problem with the past, is like, then you get more resentful because you kept losing more days, and then you get focused on Monday, and then you get focused on Tuesday, and it's Wednesday. And you're like, oh, I just can't get out of this rut now. And you're living in this reciprocal cycle of just dwelling on everything you just keep missing, because you just refuse to acknowledge the lesson and let it go.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what happened to us. We lost 2 days, but it was a valuable lesson for me. So I'm at peace with the sense that like it gave me a tool that I'd struggled with for years now.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out why I had to fall out in so many different conversations and situations. And so I sort of rented some space there for 2 days and lost those. And I don't think now I'll understand, like, okay, I'm getting ready to get in that place, and I can now verbalize to you, hey, you know, I think we're getting to that point where you're kind of making me feel like
Yeah.
I'm lesser in this conversation. And then you may now, oh shit,
Right.
I remember
Let me reword
what we
and
just,
rephrase and
yeah.
yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I am always super grateful for you to sit down with me, and I'm glad that you finally agreed, and or at least acknowledged that like this is a thing.
I did do that.
So everybody heard it. Episode 4, Danielle did agree. Miss Danielle did agree to doing this every couple of weeks with me,
I'm
and
happy to share. I hope that some people can gain some peace, even if it's just the tiniest little piece, and be able to utilize it in their lives and grow and just be happy.
yeah, I mean, because our idea of it's the Be Early podcast. We want people to explore the ideas, to get them down a path, to start defining what their elite is. Like we want you to have the tools and some wisdom and some perspective to go, man, you know what? My elite is this, and here's what I'm going to do to get there.
Yep.
And here's what I'm going to do to continue to expand on that once I know what it is, once I've defined it. And that's for us, that's probably the greatest gift that we can do is our successes and failures through life, and
Yep.
our unconventional path that we've decided to walk here together is filled with so much shit that we didn't even realize was giving us the tools
Mm-hmm.
to have, a very exciting future together, at least moving forward past, we just hit 18 years this year. So
Last week.
woo.
This week. Whatever.
It's not a big deal.
It is. My head hurts.
You're such a wacko. So anyways, we are super grateful that you guys have spent a little bit of time with us and came this far, and hopefully
Absolutely.
you guys stuck some tools in your pockets around some communication and the way communication works with yourself first and foremost, and how that bleeds over into all the relationships that you value currently in your life, and how you can add value to those even more, and how you can connect even deeper. So this is a good place to be.
It is.
Man, you're so fucking hot.
Stop.
It's ridiculous.
Episode 4. Done.
I hate that you end these. I end these. I'm the host. This bitch, I swear.
I'm the co-pilot today.
Co-host.
Same thing.
All right, guys. See you next time.